When I was diagnosed with cancer, I never imagined my wife would walk out on me. But that's exactly what happened. I had always thought we'd face life's challenges together, as we'd promised during our wedding vows. But when things got tough, Sarah, my wife of over 20 years, decided she couldn't handle it anymore. She left me without a second thought. I was heartbroken, confused, and overwhelmed with grief. I spent countless nights crying myself to sleep, wondering what had gone wrong. After the treatment, I slowly started to regain my strength. I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. My body wasn't the same anymore, but my will to live had only grown stronger. I worked hard to regain my health, my finances, and my sense of independence. But what I didn't know was that Sarah was about to reappear in my life. Years later, after I had finally found peace, she saw me again. She had heard about my recovery and had learned that I was doing better. I didn't know what to expect. Would she be remorseful? Would she regret leaving me when I needed her the most? Or would she just come back, expecting everything to go back to the way it was before? The moment we saw each other again, I could see the surprise in her eyes. She was shocked at how much I had changed, both physically and emotionally. She couldn't believe how much I had accomplished without her by my side. I stood there, looking at the woman who had once been my everything, but I felt nothing but a cold emptiness. She tried to apologize, to explain herself, but it didn't matter anymore. The man I was before had died along with my old life. Now, I was someone completely different, stronger, wiser, and no longer dependent on her love or approval. I didn't need her. And as she stood there, realizing the truth, I knew that I had finally moved on. It had been 3 years since Sarah left, and in those years, I had changed more than I could have ever imagined. The man who once lay weak and broken, clinging to the hope that his wife would come back and take care of him, was gone. In his place stood someone entirely different, someone stronger, someone who had faced the harshest of realities and survived. At first, I was bitter. I couldn't understand why she would leave me when I was at my weakest. I thought love was supposed to mean standing by each other through thick and thin. But as the months went by, I realized that bitterness wouldn't help me recover. It was in that realization that I began my true healing process. I started to focus on myself. I focused on getting my health back on track, eating healthier, working out, and doing everything I could to regain my strength. I even took up gardening, something I never thought I would enjoy. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life. My body wasn't the same as it used to be, but it was stronger. My mind was clearer. And most importantly, my heart was no longer burdened by the weight of my past. I made new friends. I rebuilt my career. I found a sense of purpose again. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living. And it wasn't until I was living fully again that Sarah decided to reach out. She found out about my recovery through mutual friends, and curiosity brought her back into my life. I didn't know what to expect when I saw her again. Would she be ashamed of what she did? Would she try to rekindle what we once had? Or would she see me as the same man she left behind? When we met, I could see the shock in her eyes. She was stunned by how much I had changed. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected me to not need her anymore. It was almost like she was looking at a stranger. She tried to apologize, but her words felt hollow to me. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her sympathy. What I needed was to feel complete on my own, and I had already done that. There was no going back to who I was before, and I didn't want to. The man I was now was proud, independent, and free from the chains of my past. I could see her trying to find the right words, but I didn't need them. The healing was already done. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just indifferent. As she stood there, awkwardly fumbling for words, I realized that the only thing left to say was the truth. I didn't need her in my life anymore. I had moved on, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace with that. I had found my strength, and that was enough. As the days passed after Sarah's return, I felt a strange mix of emotions. It was not anger or bitterness, but more of a lingering confusion. For so long, I had carried the weight of her departure with me, thinking that my life would never be complete without her. But now, standing in front of me, was the woman who had once been my world, and yet, I realized I didn't need her in my life anymore. I had made peace with my past, and in doing so, I had found strength I never knew I had. It was as if a switch had flipped inside of me. I had spent years thinking about what went wrong, what I could have done differently, but now I understood that my life was better without the baggage of that relationship. Sarah, on the other hand, was still stuck in the past. She kept apologizing, asking for forgiveness, but it felt empty. There was no remorse in her voice, no true understanding of what she had done. It was almost as if she expected everything to go back to how it was before, as if time could be reversed. But I had moved on. I had done the hard work of rebuilding myself, and I wasn't about to undo all of that just because she wanted to rekindle what we once had. The more she spoke, the more I realized how much she had taken me for granted. She had left me when I was at my lowest, and now, years later, she came back expecting everything to be the same. I couldn't understand why she thought I would be willing to just pick up where we left off. There was a time when I would have done anything to have her back, but that man was gone. In his place was a stronger, more independent version of myself. I didn't need her approval, and I certainly didn't need her to define my happiness. The hardest part was seeing how her presence affected me. At first, I thought I would feel something. Anger, maybe, or even a sense of closure. But instead, I felt a deep sense of indifference. It was as if the years of pain and longing had been erased by the time I had spent healing and growing on my own. The woman standing in front of me was a ghost of the past, and I was no longer the man who would have begged her to stay. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just indifferent. I saw her looking at me, waiting for some sign that I wanted her back, but I didn't give her one. I didn't need her in my life anymore. I had learned how to be strong without her, and that was enough. As she stood there, the silence between us was deafening. She finally spoke, but her words were no longer what I wanted to hear. I didn't need her apology, I didn't need her excuses, and I didn't need her to make me feel guilty for moving on. I had already forgiven myself for what had happened, and that was all that mattered. I simply walked away. I didn't look back, because I knew that the man who had been left behind was no longer the person I was. I had found a new life, a new purpose, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even Sarah, take that away from me. As time went on, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. It was hard to believe how far I had come, from the man who was once bedridden and unable to do anything for himself, to someone who now had full control over his life again. When Sarah had left, I felt like I had nothing left to live for. The life we had built together seemed to shatter in an instant, leaving me broken, confused, and isolated. But now, looking back, I realized something important. Her leaving me wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new. I spent the first few months after her departure in a haze, barely able to make sense of anything. The loneliness was unbearable, and I wondered how I could possibly continue without her. But then, I started to find small ways to heal. I took up hobbies I had long abandoned. I started exercising again, pushing my body to get stronger. Each day, I could feel myself growing, not just physically but emotionally as well. The man who had once depended on Sarah for everything was no longer the person I saw in the mirror. It was freeing to realize that I didn't need anyone to define me. I was capable of standing on my own. It was during this time of healing that I began to rediscover what it meant to truly live. I started traveling, something I had always dreamed of but never had the courage to do before. I took trips to places I had never been, met new people, and found joy in experiences I had long overlooked. But the most important part of this journey was the way I learned to trust myself again. I had spent so many years relying on others, especially Sarah, to guide me, to tell me what was right and wrong. But I no longer needed that. I knew that I could make decisions on my own, and that made all the difference. As I moved through my days, I realized that I had become someone I was proud of. The pain from the past had shaped me into a stronger person. I had learned that the most important relationship I could have was with myself. And just when I thought I had fully healed, just when I thought I had closed the door on the past, Sarah appeared again. She called me, asking if we could meet. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect. But a part of me knew that I needed to face this, to close this chapter of my life for good. When we met, it was obvious that she had changed too. She wasn't the woman I remembered. Her face showed the passage of time, just as mine did. She apologized for everything that had happened, for leaving when I was sick, for not being there when I needed her most. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything I had been through. I remembered the pain, the loneliness, the struggle to find my way again. And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't go back. She wasn't the woman I had once loved, and I wasn't the man she had left behind. We were two completely different people, shaped by the choices we had made. I told her that I had forgiven her, but I couldn't offer her anything more than that. It wasn't bitterness that I felt toward her. It was simply the realization that I no longer needed her. I had found my own strength, and that was enough. As the days went on, I felt more and more certain that the past had no place in my present. Sarah's reappearance had been a shock, but it wasn't the reunion I had imagined. I had expected some sort of emotional closure, a final moment of reconciliation, but that didn't happen. Instead, I felt like we were two strangers, each holding on to memories that no longer fit into our lives. I couldn't deny that a part of me had once loved her deeply, but I also couldn't ignore how much I had changed. The man who once depended on Sarah for validation, the man who had begged her to stay when she left, was no longer here. That man had died in the hospital room, left behind with his dreams and hopes for a family that didn't care. In his place stood someone who was no longer seeking approval from anyone. I had found my own peace, my own strength, and that was all that mattered. What struck me the most during our conversation was how much she still saw me as the same person I had been years ago. She expected things to go back to how they were, as if the time apart hadn't changed everything. But I had changed. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet, to take care of myself, to be independent. I didn't need her to survive anymore. I didn't even need her to forgive me. It was clear that she was hoping for something more, an apology from me, a moment where I would say that I missed her, that I wanted her back in my life. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't give her what she was asking for, because it wasn't what I needed. I had spent so long waiting for her to come back, thinking that if I just held on long enough, we could fix everything. But now, I saw the truth. I had been holding on to something that was never meant to be. I had to let go for my own sake. There was a time when I would have given anything to have her back. I would have begged her to stay. I would have done anything to fix what was broken. But that man didn't exist anymore. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had watched his life fall apart in front of him. Now, I was someone who had rebuilt himself from the ground up, someone who had learned the hard way that his happiness didn't depend on anyone but himself. I told her that I had forgiven her, that I no longer held any resentment, but that didn't mean I wanted her back. I didn't need her to be happy, and I didn't need her to feel validated. The only thing I needed now was to continue moving forward with my life, without looking back. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but I wasn't going to let that change my decision. I had spent too many years living in the past, clinging to a version of myself that no longer existed. It was time to let that go and embrace who I had become. Sarah stood there, silent for a moment, and then she nodded. I wasn't sure if she understood, or if she was just accepting what I was telling her. Either way, I had said what I needed to say, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. As she turned and walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. This was it. The past was gone, and I was finally free. After Sarah left, I tried to focus on the positives. For the first time in years, I had space to breathe, to think, and to process everything that had happened. I spent the next few weeks going over the details of my life, the way I had lived, the choices I had made, and how much of myself I had sacrificed for the people around me. It was strange, this feeling of freedom. It was like waking up from a long sleep, realizing that I had been missing out on living my own life. I began to reclaim parts of myself that I had long ignored. I started spending time with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. We would grab coffee, take walks, and talk about life. It was refreshing to realize that I wasn't alone, that there were people who still cared about me. But the most important thing was the realization that I didn't need Sarah's validation. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel good about myself. I started going to therapy, something I had always resisted in the past. I never thought I needed it, but I quickly learned how much it helped me to talk to someone who wasn't emotionally invested in my life. It gave me a clearer perspective on everything. It wasn't just about Sarah. It was about how I had let my whole life revolve around other people, about how I had lost myself in the process of trying to make others happy. Therapy helped me to unpack the years of emotional baggage I had carried, and as I worked through it, I started to realize that I had been my own worst enemy. I had put everyone else's needs before my own, and that had led to me feeling empty, unimportant, and abandoned. But now, I was learning how to prioritize myself. I started to focus on my health, something I had neglected for far too long. I joined a gym and began working out regularly. I paid attention to what I was eating, making sure that I was nourishing my body in a way that I never had before. I could feel my strength returning, both physically and mentally. I was taking control of my life again, and that felt empowering. One afternoon, as I was leaving the gym, I ran into an old colleague, Mike. He was someone I had worked with years ago, before everything had gone downhill. He was surprised to see me looking so good, so strong, and we quickly fell into conversation. We caught up on life, shared a few laughs, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly living in the moment. Mike mentioned that he had started his own business and that he was looking for someone to help with marketing. He asked if I would be interested in joining him. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to dive back into the corporate world, but something inside me told me that this was the opportunity one had been waiting for. It felt like the right step to take. I said yes. That decision turned out to be one of the best I had made in years. Working with Mike reignited my passion for creativity and problem solving. It reminded me of the person I used to be, confident, driven, and excited about the future. Slowly, I built my career back up. I was no longer the man defined by the past. I had become someone new, someone who had learned the value of self-care and independence. The more time passed, the more I realized that Sarah's absence in my life wasn't a loss. It was a gift. It gave me the chance to truly find myself again. I was no longer tied to the past, and with each day that passed, I felt stronger, more capable, and more at peace. Life was no longer about trying to make others happy at the expense of my own happiness. It was about living for myself, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing just that. As the months passed, I started to notice subtle changes in myself. I had grown accustomed to the peace and independence I had found, but there were still moments when I thought about Sarah. I couldn't help it. She had been a part of my life for so long, and even though I no longer needed her, there was still a part of me that missed what we once had. But those moments were fleeting, and soon enough, I reminded myself that I was better off without her. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and I had found joy in doing things for myself. I started to make more time for the things I loved, like hiking and cooking. The simple pleasures that had once seemed trivial now brought me a sense of fulfillment I had never known. As I continued on this path of self-discovery, I found myself becoming more confident in who I was and what I wanted. It wasn't about seeking approval from others anymore. It was about living life on my own terms. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was at a cafe downtown, working on a project for the business when I saw Sarah walking down the street. It was as if time had stopped. I hadn't seen her in over 2 years, and seeing her now brought back a flood of memories. I could feel the rush of emotions, confusion, anger, and something else I couldn't quite place. I tried to ignore it, but my heart started to race. She hadn't seen me yet, but I knew she would. I had changed. I knew that, but I wasn't sure if she would see it. I wasn't the man who had once begged her to come back. I wasn't the man who had waited for her to return. I was someone different now, stronger, more independent. As she approached, I saw her eyes scan the crowd, and then, for a brief moment, they landed on me. There was a flicker of recognition, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I watched as she stopped in her tracks, her mouth slightly agape, unsure of what to do. For a moment, I thought about walking away. I thought about leaving the past behind and continuing on with my life without saying a word to her. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the desire for closure. I didn't know. But instead of walking away, I stood up, making eye contact with her. She hesitated for a moment longer, and then she came over to where I was sitting. "James," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she wasn't sure how to speak to me anymore. "It's been so long." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words. "It has," I replied, my voice steady. We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure of what to say next. She looked different, older somehow, and I could tell that the years had taken their toll on her, just as they had on me. But in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need her to explain herself. I didn't need her apology. The years had changed me, and I had changed her. We were no longer the same people we had been when we were together. And that was okay. "I'm glad to see you're doing well," I said, my tone calm. "But I've moved on. I've found my peace." She looked at me, searching my face, perhaps hoping for something more, but I didn't give it to her. There was nothing more to say. I had already found what I needed: strength, independence, and the ability to move on. "I'm happy for you," she said softly, and for the first time, I believed her. "I hope you continue to find happiness." I gave her a small smile, but I didn't say anything more. It was time to let go. She had walked away once before, and now I was the one walking away. I turned, heading back to my table to finish my work. It felt like a chapter had closed, but this time, I wasn't looking back. I was ready to keep moving forward, building the life I had fought so hard to create. As the days continued to pass, I felt a sense of clarity settling in my life. The emotions from seeing Sarah again were still fresh, but they no longer had the power to consume me. I had reached a point where I understood something that had been eluding me for years. I had been waiting for her to give me permission to be happy, to move on, but I had never truly given myself that permission. I had lived my life thinking that my happiness depended on someone else, on Sarah, on what she thought of me. But now, I realized that the only person who could define my happiness was me. My mornings had started to feel different. I wasn't waking up with a knot in my stomach anymore, worried about the past or what was coming next. Instead, I was waking up with a sense of anticipation, a curiosity about what the day would bring. I had started to reconnect with parts of myself that I had long neglected. I was taking the time to enjoy the little things, the sound of birds chirping outside my window, the smell of coffee brewing in the morning, the feeling of the sun on my face during a walk around the park. It was amazing how much beauty I had overlooked in the past, caught up in the drama of my relationship with Sarah. But now, I was fully present in my own life. One afternoon, as I was working on a project at my desk, I got a call from Mike, my business partner. "Hey James, I've got something I think you might be interested in," he said, his voice full of excitement. "I've been talking to a few people about expanding our business, and there's a big opportunity in the works. I want you to be a part of it." I felt a rush of adrenaline at the thought. This was the kind of opportunity one had been waiting for, something that would challenge me, push me to grow even more. I had worked so hard to rebuild my life, and now, here was a chance to take it to the next level. Without hesitation, I agreed. The project was everything I had hoped for and more. It brought out a side of me that I hadn't realized was still there, the side that loved solving problems, coming up with creative solutions, and pushing myself to achieve new things. As the weeks went by, the project grew, and so did my confidence. I started to realize that I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was creating something new, something even better than what I had before. And it wasn't just about the work. It was about the person I was becoming, someone who didn't need to rely on anyone else to feel whole. I had learned how to take care of myself, how to stand up for myself, and how to pursue what made me truly happy. Life was no longer something that happened to me. It was something I was actively creating. One evening, as I sat on my porch, watching the sun set, I couldn't help but smile. This was the life I had worked so hard for. This was the life I deserved. And as I looked back at everything I had gone through, I realized that I wouldn't change a thing. The pain, the loss, the struggles, they had all led me here, to this moment of peace and fulfillment. I had come a long way from the man I used to be, and I was proud of who I had become. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly content. And I knew, deep down, that I was finally living the life I was meant to live. As time went by, I found myself reflecting on the progress I had made, both personally and professionally. The past few months had been transformative, but I had also realized that I was still carrying a certain weight with me. It was not a weight of guilt or regret, but rather the weight of what had once been. The memories of Sarah, the years we spent together, and the way things had fallen apart. Yet, I had come to understand that these memories no longer held power over me. They were simply chapters in a book that had already been written, and I had moved on to a new story. The journey of self-discovery had led me to a place where I could look at the past without pain. Instead of bitterness, there was understanding. I no longer saw Sarah as the woman who had abandoned me. I saw her as a part of my life story, a story that had shaped who I was, but not who I was becoming. I had learned to live for myself, to make decisions based on my own needs and desires. And it was liberating. I wasn't searching for validation from anyone anymore. I had learned to find fulfillment in the things I loved, in the work I was doing, in the friendships I had reconnected with, in the simple joys of life. But one thing was certain. I had finally found peace. As I continued to grow and thrive, I started to realize that I wasn't just building a new life. I was rebuilding my sense of self-worth. There were moments when I would catch myself in the mirror and realize just how much I had changed. The man I saw now was confident, content, and in control. He wasn't the man who had been left behind. He was the man who had risen from the ashes of his past and had built something far stronger than before. I thought back to the time when I had felt so small, when I had believed that my life was over because Sarah had left. I couldn't have been more wrong. That was not the end. That was just the beginning. The more I reflected on how far I had come, the more I understood that the real lesson was not in the pain or the loss, but in the strength I had discovered within myself. I had done the work, I had made the choices, and I had come out stronger on the other side. I no longer needed anyone to define my happiness. I had learned to define it for myself. And as I looked out at the world, I realized that there were still so many opportunities for me to explore. There was no longer any fear of the future. I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The life I had once thought was gone had actually been waiting for me all along. All it took was a willingness to let go of the past and embrace the person I had become. And as I stood there, looking at the horizon, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't known in years. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly living, not for anyone else, but for myself.